Recording in progress.
What that really means.
3 o'clock already? All right, everybody. Lee's called in and said he's going to be a little late, but we have a pretty packed agenda, so I'm just going to go forward and he'll get here when he gets here. I don't see the thumbs up from, oh, there it is. Thanks, Rob. All right, we're good to go. Let's call this meeting to order. The March meeting of Budget, Capital, and Personnel. The first item on our agenda is minutes approval. Could somebody move those, please? Thank you, Amanda. Rich seconds. There was one correction on the minutes that I gave to Taylor and Britt. It's on page 17, packet page 17. The third paragraph from the bottom of the page, the last sentence, they determined it is beneficial to start the budget process and consideration of over-target requests in early spring. It should say rather than during the legislature's budget hearings. And then the first sentence of the next paragraph, Ms. Jane explained that the legislators are policymakers and administration employees are the administrators. That's another correction. And with that, are there any other comments? We ready to vote? All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Changes to the agenda. We are removing resolution ID number 11484, approval of amended bylaws for the Tompkins County Workforce Development and Inclusion Committee, because they haven't had a chance to vote on that yet. So we will not be considering it today. Are there any comments from the public? Anybody here online? Apparently not. Great, we'll just move right on. County Administrator report. Take it away, Lisa Holmes.
Well, I don't have much to report except we are still very much engaged in advocacy efforts with the state and keeping our ear to the ground around the state's interception of the Medicaid FMAP funds. We're preparing some public information to go out in that regard, and I've been in touch with NISAC as of Friday of last week on that issue. And it does look like it's a very entrenched issue that the governor is showing no signs of relenting on. So we're talking about other advocacy options at this point. And other than that, we are, county staff is preparing to address the winter storm that's upon us for the next 2 nights. So we've been having discussions around that. And then I have 3 resolutions for consideration.
All right, so we have appropriation from contingent fund, additional.
I had a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rich.
What are the other options you're considering, if you can talk to them, speak to them?
Well, in consultation with NISAC, they were talking about the pros and cons of if the governor offers, or if we find other funding in the state budget to offset the Medicaid funds, and the governor offers that toward counties, and the counties accept it. It's a tacit acceptance of the way that the governor is interpreting the ACA and taking that funds and taking those funds, and it would make it very difficult to ever get that funding back, or should counties in the future choose any kind of legal action against it, it would basically nullify that. So those are some of the things that are being discussed.
I will say that the New York State Association of Counties and the New York State County Board Chairs Association has written a letter, is that it's unlikely that's going to come forward simply because the way was it the CARES Act? No, it was the ACA. The big piece of this is the ACA EF map, and the way the ACA statute was worded, it wasn't as clear as it has been in other statutes that enhanced the FMAP, that it should be passed through the counties. And apparently our congressional delegation isn't in a big hurry to take that on, although Congressman Molinaro and Congresswoman Tenney have filed a bill. I'm not sure it's going to go anywhere, but that's where we are.
Not to belabor this, but it just strikes me as odd how much political capital the governor seems to be spending on taking this money on really dubious grounds, and yet
There's $6 billion at stake, as I understand it. I think that what's driving this bus is not the EF payments going forward. It's the reconciliation that hasn't been paid for 3 or 4 or 5 years, since 2017, I think.
think they don't have the money,
I think they've spent the money.
but I would have done it.
I'm being told that they've spent.
You won't be elected governor anytime soon.
Well, somebody got elected governor when they were spending our reconciliation money.
Yeah, I'm of the understanding that that money is out the door, it's been spent, and the state has reached the Medicaid global cap, their cap. And so they need money, and they're coming to the counties to take the county share.
Doo-doo rolls downhill. Gravity works. All right. Resolution. Appropriation from Contingent Fund, additional funding for Community Recovery Grant Program Administration, ID 11454. Can I get a motion, please? Amanda moves, Rich seconds. This is pretty self-explanatory. Does anybody have any questions?
This is the matter Dan was discussing regarding overruns. Well, additional work that had to be done.
Additional work that has to be done because this program was a victim of its own success. Mike?
I'm going to vote for this, but I think if there's anything in the future, we ought to take another look at it at the full legislature, and I think it should be charged to the pot of money that we set aside for these grants.
I tend to sympathize with that view, and I was against taking these administrative costs out of the general county funds initially. I thought it should all come out of the recovery fund pot, but we made that decision and that ship has sailed. So for now, I guess I'll just vote for this as well. Anybody else?
Just in defense of our prior decision, you'd end up never quite knowing how much grant money you had. I mean, that was the rationale I think we used when we set this up this way, is that we could offer a definite fund instead of trying to figure out, and we'd be in this situation today in that we didn't know that we would have needed to withhold this. So this money would have to come from somewhere.
Well, in fairness, I think some of us were concerned about that, but I think there were also people who just weren't satisfied we could never give away enough money, and they didn't want to, yeah. So in any event, here we are. Are we ready to vote? All in favor?
Yes.
Thank you, that's unanimous. Okay, next resolution. Authorizing a public hearing on proposed local law number B of 2023, amending Article 27 of the county charter, ID 11472. Can I get a motion on that? Rich moves, Lee seconds. Yeah, this is just to put a charter revision up for public hearing. So I guess the next resolution we're going to be considering is what that charter provision is actually going to say. So let's just get the public hearing piece done, and then we'll hear from Lisa about what we're having a public hearing about. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, now we get to the meat of the matter. Resolution to adopt local law number B of 2023, a local law amending Article 27 of the Tompkins County Charter to implement restructure of the Division of Employment and Training, Office of Employment and Training, ID 11471. Can I get a motion, please? Rich moves. Amanda seconds. Lisa, I'm going to let you take this one.
Sure, thank you. So this was something that we were planning on considering with the departure of Jackie Muyesu as the Director of the Office of Employment and Training. The fact that Rosemary departed from the Workforce Development Board simultaneously offered us the opportunity to look at this even a little bit more. Currently, they are considered two separate departments, though in the charter they are linked. They're both considered department heads. However, the Office of Employment and Training currently reports to the Commissioner of Human Resources as opposed to the county administrator because of requirements through a Department of Labor for a particular firewall. So that was the piece that we were going to look at changing, but with both directors' positions currently vacant, we and Rosemary, upon her departure, recommended that we look at putting them all under one structure with the appropriate firewalls in place as per the Department of Labor, that there may be some efficiencies to be gained and some further collaboration within the department that could be achieved through this. So we have discussed this for a few months with both departments, the interim leaders and staff of both departments, as well as the Department of Labor, and are bringing to you a revised structure for consideration, which would amount to having one department head to cover workforce development, having two deputies, one on the Workforce Development Board side and one on the Office of Employment and Training side, and then an organization structure that flows from there. So I think that it allows for a little bit of cost savings, and the cost savings wasn't the primary driver here. It was more organizational structure and efficiency and what made sense. And this proposed structure is in place in other counties similar to ours, and it is approved by the Department of Labor. So happy to take questions.
Rich?
I was totally baffled. I was looking at the float or the org chart on page 25 of the agenda.
Yes.
And I had several questions. What are both of the firewalls for? Why are there two deputy directors, and why are there three oversight boards? It seems incredibly complicated, and I don't understand why.
So, Department of Labor?
It's the Department of Labor, and it has to do with WIOA. It has to do
I'm sorry, WIOA?
The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, and the restrictions that flow down from the feds to the
So
state
it's not
government.
we owe a debt of gratitude to the Department of Labor for doing this to us.
No, we owe a lot of extra work.
We owe a.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
So these are state requirements that are driving what looks like just a total mess.
They drive the organizational structure, and that's why, in part, that's what has driven the Office of Employment and Training to be, for the last several years, reporting to the HR commissioner, who has nothing to do with workforce programming. So that was one thing that we wanted to solve by doing this, is to align their mission and their reporting with who is actually, in reality, providing oversight. The structure around the One-Stop Operations and Oversight Committee, the Workforce Development Board, those are also WIOA requirements, and they meet with the firewall requirements for the Department of Labor.
What are the
is all I
dangers
can
that
say.
the firewall is protecting against?
I think it's about how finances are, and Bridget has been a part of this as well. I'm going to pull Bridget in if you have any further insights into this. But they receive state grants. They disperse state grants through program. They also those that are providing oversight to them programmatically should not be in a position of grant disbursement. I see Bridget shaking or nodding her head. Am I warm here?
Yes, yes, it's related to the fiscal requirements associated with the WIOA funding. So they're just built-in firewalls to ensure that there's no conflict among receiving the money and then granting it out, and the required reporting associated with that.
So why are there firewalls to the finance department? What does that protect us?
That was also something that the Department of Labor wanted to see in the org chart, that the county receiving these funds and dispersing the funds to the program. I honestly,
This is what New York State wants.
this is what they want. And then the other piece of it, there's a firewall between the Workforce Development Board, who receives funds and grants them for Summer Youth Employment Program, and the Office of Employment and Training receives those funds. So that is a logical firewall that makes sense. But I see Drew just popped on. I don't know if you had something to say about that finance firewall.
Yeah, I think as you're explaining it, the funds come in, and then they want to be clear they can follow the funds out from the finance department. So the funds come into the county, they get overseen by the Workforce Development Board, and the Workforce Development Board then contracts with the Workforce Center and the youth programs. So.
Can I just say that I think that we could explore this ad nauseum, and at the end of the day, nobody in Tompkins County would come up with the structure this Byzantine unless we had to, in order to comply with state and federal regulations.
My questions have been answered, but Rich, you probably never saw the original org chart for the Department of Emergency Response when we created it, and similar advisory boards, and that was a big consideration at the time. And Norm will remember, I had to put one of my programs underneath the Department of Health for state health department funding for one of the positions. And then we had grants coming from the feds for cops and Homeland Security, and we had to set this up just exactly in order to maintain the accountability on the financing and show that it was going to a department charged with administering the program. So that explains, because it's unusual for us to delineate the positions in the charter, but it explains it. So thank you.
Sorry to, it looks like our sales tax flow chart.
Well, I think
yes.
you're just looking for a rational explanation
Yeah,
where there
there is.
may not be one.
Follow the money.
Yeah. I wanted to make two other quick points, though. That the way that we have been operating as in these programs and with these two departments and vis-a-vis the Workforce Development Board, the Finance Office, we have been in compliance, and it's really just, so the day-to-day operations are working. The way that we display them in this org chart looks like spaghetti, but, and then the other thing that I wanted to bring to the committee's attention that was modified at GO is, and that passed through GO, on the third whereas of this resolution, the cost savings is estimated to be $36,000 in salary and fringe. As we were putting this together, we were taking into consideration another salary or two that we thought we had accounted for, or we had not accounted for, and we had. So it's $36,000 in cost savings.
So it's not as good as it looks here.
It's not as good as.
So I guess, can we move that as, can somebody move that as an amendment?
Consider it friendly.
I think that it came out of GO. Oh, did,
Is that GO yet?
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We did it at HED.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
It came out of HED with that amended, and
Okay.
it passed HED with that amendment. That's right.
Well, let's pass it out of here correctly. Can I get an amendment? Yeah. Okay.
If I moved it, that's friendly.
Okay.
I think I moved it.
Okay. Well, is it friendly to
It's friendly.
everybody?
Yes, it's friendly.
It's just, yeah.
One more question. Where do these people sit? Are they in the same office?
So the Workforce Development Board staff, and there are 3 of them, sit in the, alongside IAED staff on Seneca Street. And the Office of Employment and Training staff, Workforce New York, sit
Center Ithaca.
at the Center Ithaca, and they are required to co-locate with Department of Labor staff.
Are you out of questions now?
I'm out of questions. Sorry to
Do we
delay.
get, are you going to ask all these again at GO?
I will. I
Okay.
will. And it in front of the legislature. Org chart of the year. Yeah.
So I want to be sure I understand this. What we're basically doing is replacing 2 different department heads who currently report to 2 different places with 1 department head, a deputy department head, and the department head now just reports to admin.
That's correct.
Okay. Any more questions? All in favor? That's unanimous.
Thank you.
All right, now we're going to discuss the budget process. And Norma, do you want to take this, or are you prepared, or put you on the spot?
Well, I knew it was coming.
I mean,
I wasn't exactly sure where we were going with it, but yeah, we can talk about the budget process for sure.
well, I think that where I'd like to get us is, giving our program committees and our legislative colleagues the heads up that they should start thinking about expanding programs or adding new programs and initiatives sooner rather than later, so that as you and Lisa move forward with the department heads to put together a recommended budget, you know where we want to go. Mike?
I think that's a great idea, but somehow we got to get the word out to some of the agencies that come in at the last minute and want us to give them extra money. I don't know if I want to name them here, but I think you know which ones I mean.
Well,
That
yes.
every year, they've got some new thing. Not only do they get money under the Human Services Coalition, but now they want to come in for extra funding for whatever worthy cause they have.
Well,
I think if they want that, they should come to us early.
I agree. And I think it shouldn't be that difficult for us if we have a final formal statement of how we want this to go. It shouldn't be all that difficult to disseminate it
No, what I'll do is they'll start sending those notices out now so that they get multiple. And we're going to be doing, I didn't get a chance to report, but we are moving right along with our budget software. We'll be getting these folks together anyway when we're going over the new software, and we'll be able to kind of drive that home too at that time.
A good opportunity. When will that be, Norma? Do you know?
Yeah, well, we're going to have our first operation department meeting to talk about the budget operations plan next week. So we've already started working with the folks for capital, hopefully have that buttoned up this week, and then be able to bring that something. I'm planning to have something to bring to you guys soon, but
Okay.
it's a monster to get together.
Somewhere on there, there'll be a big button that'll say no.
That's right, exactly.
I hope so.
It buzzes too.
To help our administrator.
So when you had asked me to look at this and consider it, one of the things that I thought might be really helpful to the department or to the committees is to have a copy of the work plans for their particular program committee included, or have it readily available on their desks or something, so that as we're thinking about what kind of initiatives we want to add to the departments, these work plans have been developed. If you look at county administration, if we get too many more projects handed out, I'm not sure what we're going to do. But, and I'm not going to speak for Lisa, but there's a lot of things coming, and looking at the work plans, I think you could probably see that some departments are really at the cap of what new initiative they can take on at this point before they finish something else. So that just might be a really good way to keep in check what we're thinking about, how we want to move forward. But for sure, that does not speak to the agencies and whether or not those folks are going to come forward and ask for additional funding. So we can definitely start doing some regular communications to them about the plan.
Okay, Lisa, I know you're trying to get in here.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
maybe I overspoke. But
No, you didn't at all, and I didn't mean this, but maybe we'll playing good cop, bad cop, and I'll play bad cop today. That it's been the case that we've been fortunate enough to consider additions and expansions with budgets these last few years, but I think what would be equally as important is guidance early to the legislature about to administration about where to cut, and particularly given the early news that we're getting from Albany about the Medicaid EFMAP funds, that's $1.5 million off the top that we're going to have to cut, and we're going into labor negotiations. So.
Yeah, and I guess one thing that we have to bear in mind is if we want to add programs or augment programs within a department that's already working to capacity, that means we have to consider adding staff. And as Mike noted, we're not really in a position where we ought to be doing any more of that after last year's budget. Amanda?
Yeah, I guess I don't really see the problem that we're trying to address here as the departments. It's the legislators.
Right.
And I feel like what happened last year, I guess we already went over this at the last meeting, but is that people come up with their personal projects or they want to add something to a department. I feel like it's, if at that point there's, in September, if the departments want something or if an agency wants something that hasn't been put into the budget at that point, they have a right to ask for it. And we can say no. But I think we need to adjust our process so we're not all just coming in at the end when you've already figured all this out. And a little bit of that is okay, but when everybody's doing it, it's overwhelming. So that's the part that concerns me. But I also appreciate what Lisa said about, where should we cut? I've always felt like it was, I've been here for 5 budgets, and it always felt a little bit awkward to say, oh, I want to cut this, and it felt like if you suggested cutting something that you didn't believe in that program or something. But I think what you're saying is like, that's good guidance as well. So I think we have to shift our, or at least I do, can't speak for everyone, shift my thoughts about we can't have everything necessarily. So.
Well, that's exactly the problem. I mean, as I've pointed out a couple of times in the past, the OTRs that have come through the legislature's budget process have generally been OTRs that the departments had already asked for. The county administrator had said no, and then we'd taken it upon ourselves to put it back in, which makes it much easier for the departments to fit that into their work plan. What we did last year was just this out of nowhere. I want this, I want that, and very little of it necessarily fit in with departmental work plans. Lee?
I know where you're coming from, and I agree with you pretty much all along the way. The only thing that is the flexibility, and as Amanda's pointed out, there are opportunities there to jump back in. But one of the telling things, I think, oftentimes that points out the needs is when we have the department heads doing their presentations, and you start to draw out a little information about, are they adequately staffed, and you get a little of that, and I reacted to that last fall and put forward a move to better fund the department. Yeah, so that's my only concern, is that maintain some flexibility so that if you do see some needs. And the other thing is that I think the process we went through with the recovery funds pointed out some human needs that we may want to talk about along the lines of, at the budget retreat or somewhere in that proximity back this way, because I've still got questions in my mind about food pantries and some things that we really couldn't do a lot with, but it's an area that I don't know that we've ever looked at very, very deeply.
The food pantry network is funded through the Human Services Coalition. So but I don't know how much more deeply.
Now, just to know if there's a need that is followed since the pandemic period of time, and I know that we got a little nitpicky with the Human Services Coalition on some things we didn't think they had considered adequately last year. So laying some ground rules and maybe giving them some flexibility that they didn't have, because I can remember one or two issues. I can't get to the top of them right here, but it was kind of an answer that, well, that's really not in the parameters of what we considered, but we really didn't have a bucket to place those in either.
Well, I don't want to be inflexible, certainly. But I don't think that anybody's suggesting that this is the department head's fault. No. I think it's just that what Norm is suggesting will facilitate our program committees thinking about what they might want to put forward for Lisa and Norman's consideration when they put the budget together. So I think if we have consensus around that basic point, what Norma and I can do is talk over the next few days and get something out to the department heads and the legislators saying this is kind of the direction we're going in. Because honestly, it's not like we're going to pass a resolution or some sort of law. We don't have that for our budget process. We're just kind of trying to turn the ship and, as Amanda suggests, control expectations of our colleagues. Rich?
I agree with a lot of what's been said here, but I do think there were some good proposals that came out in the fall. The problem was they were in the fall.
Exactly. We're trying to.
I mean, if we start this earlier, I think there's some real benefit we could get, and make sure that we're not just having a departmental budget, but also the legislators are thinking about direction and setting forward-looking policy. I'm thinking of that because I've been having some conversation with the sheriff and emergency response, in relation to some public safety initiatives that probably would lead to increased cost to the county, but would end up with better public safety systems across the whole network. For example, an ambulance, fly car arrangement that would significantly improve response times for ambulance service. And that's an area we have never been in historically, but that's just because we haven't had to be. But with what's happening with ambulance service, I think we need to think about it at least. And I wouldn't want to just say, well, let's not do that because we don't have, it's new. But I don't think that's what we're saying here. I just think we're saying we have to be very careful about it, particularly because it looks like this year we're going to have to be exceedingly clever.
I just wanted to, just as a suggestion, I don't know what the restrictions are in putting information on the agendas, but maybe just having a line on every agenda that just reminds the chair to discuss budget, to think budget, to consider it each meeting, because sometimes I think it gets lost in all the other stuff. So maybe just adding it as a line, whether you address it or not, you might be able to skip over it that month, but it might be something that's worthwhile adding to the agenda to have that conversation, to go, okay, is there some budget consideration that we should be thinking about? And the chairs can help to drive that discussion.
Well,
Just a thought.
certainly, we need to urge the program committees to have a fairly robust discussion about this in their April meetings, because our budget retreat will be April 25th.
I think, Rich, I take your point. I think the difference is that you're talking about these things now with the sheriff instead of coming in September and saying, hey, I want to add a fly car to the, let's have, $500,000. And everybody's like, what? What does that mean? So I think it sounds like what you're doing is the right process. And if other people have, things that they're interested in, they're working with the department on, that's great. But it has to not just come up at the end. I'm just saying the same thing over and over again. So.
Lee?
Okay.
Brief. I just want to get this out early as we're talking about laying out that budget process. And there's something that's in the back of my mind for many years. One of your sections of the budget, one of our sections of the budget, are the program impact statements. Is there any value to those in the work that goes into putting those together every year? And I'm going back as a department head. You spend a lot of time apportioning funding and positions and so on across the programs you've identified. And I said to two administrators previously, I won't throw you into this, but I said, do you think anybody reads this? And they just laughed and said no. And I don't know that anybody didn't read it, but there's a lot of redundancy and there's an awful lot of prep work that goes in, and it may be better to shift people to a more strategic budgeting approach without that level of detail that is probably out there, but it's a lot of work for something we really don't delve into from a target standpoint.
Agreed. And as a former department head, I totally agree. And it's something that we have discussed in admin these last few budgets. This budget in particular, we have asked department heads who have done it and who've been using results-based accountability to hang with us and do it for one more year, because we don't want to lose the work that has been done for when we adopt this new budget software, which will have a more meaningful and robust way of capturing this and hopefully tying together the budget with the results that we're trying to achieve through the programs. So that's the reason we're doing it one more year, and to help us make this transition to more the better software.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. It dates back to 1994 and 95, the budget reorganization, and 25 plus years. It's changed significantly, but we're still using that tool. And
Well, hopefully this software will give us better tools and we can gather the same information in a more
Hopefully to
streamlined
5
way.
different places, that's the plan. The plan is it's all going to be in one place, and it'll be a little more, better laid out for the departments. Thank you.
Okay, so Norma and I will
Sure.
get together and probably by phone while it snows.
Plan.
All right. Moving on, Director of Finance report. We have a fund balance discussion with Drew Brayman, which may bleed over into a little educational program for all of us on how Moody's does our bond rating. So take it away, Drew.
So I had sent the committee a nice little memo that showed where we stood as far as if you look at the county from a Moody's rating. And keep in mind, what we use Moody's for is to give us a credit rating. What you or I would use, you know, if we go to the bank for a car loan or a mortgage, they pull a credit report and we have a credit score or a FICO score. Businesses and governments, municipalities, all have to deal with something similar, and that's Moody's, or there's one or two other companies that do it, but Moody's has the best track record and gives you the best bond performance. So part of the discussion I know we had a couple meetings ago was where is our fund balance and where should it go? And that's definitely up to this committee's decision. I just wanted to give some input on, you know, right now where our fund balance is versus where the fund balance policy are two different. Our fund balance is much higher. So what I shared was some of the areas. Moody's, let me do a quick screen share to give a little bit of education. And let me get into here. Hopefully you can see this. So this screen here on the right is actually what we're rated on. So this is Tompkins County. And as you can see over here, let me try and blow this up just a little bit. These are the areas. So you have the economy, you have financial performance, you have institutional framework, our debt or our leverage, and any notching factors that they may apply. So here's the measure, and we're focused on, again, Moody's looks at probably 20 to 25 different areas across the county. We were just focused on this fund balance ratio.
Drew?
Yes.
Sorry if I could interrupt with a question. Institutional framework, what does that mean?
Institutional framework that's a good question. I'd have to go back and define.
Okay.
Some of that framework, I think, is where I'll go next, and that's our ESG scores, environmental, social, and governance. And I'll go to that next a little bit, just so folks are aware. So as you can see, each of these areas has a factor, and this is where the county scored. So your top rating, and I'll click over here for a minute, your top rating is a AAA, the next rating down is a AA, and A is actually the third rating down. I wish they would just use A, B, and C, because it looks like if you have an A score, you did pretty good, but that's actually not very good. As you can see, if you look at the scorecard, we should have been at a AA2 this past year. As I mentioned before, I fought with them very hard. We went to the mat on several things that I thought we could win on, and we kept our AA1 rating, which is anywhere from 1/4 to 0.5% on each bond we do. But our scorecard includes these primary factors, okay? One of the things they added this year, and as you can see here, fund balance, we're at 45.6 as of 2001, even though the fund balance policy is lower, and that's weighted at 20% of the scorecard. So that's a pretty hefty rating. Also, the amount of debt you have is a pretty hefty rating. So those are the two things they encourage us to focus on. The amount of debt you have and the amount of fund balance you have makes up 40% of your Moody's score. Everything else gets thrown in and figured out. So a couple things they added going into the bigger area is this year they added this ESG considerations, environmental, social, and governance. Environmental are things that the county is exposed to extreme weather events such as nor'easter and exposure to flooding because the city of Ithaca, which is where more than half of our population lives, is basically in the 100-year floodplain. Where I countered them this year is that we're very active as a county to reduce the carbon emissions and switch operations to green options. So, we got kudos for that. But the first part you can't even control. A lot of the items, and even in the other areas, a lot of them you can't. The social area is demographic and labor trends. Again, items that the county government can't necessarily control, but they look at how the population is educated, any food needs, housing needs, things like that, and governance. We actually scored in an E3 and an S2, and I had these both increased a little bit. So if we go back to the fund balance, let's focus on just the fund balance. The fund balance is in this key indicators. Again, resident income we can't control. Where we can is in this financial performance, and here's the available fund balance. And as you can see, as of 2021, we had 103 million as they calculate the available fund balance. That may not have been our actual fund balance, but it's pretty close. Then going to their whole chart, this is all of the U.S. counties that they rate over here on the left side. If you look under financial performance, the available fund balance ratio, where we ended up at 45.6, they're recommending at a AAA, you go no lower than 40%. Once you drop to a 38.5, that's going to get you a AA rating. A ratings mostly have 24%. And then when you get into the Bs are around 20%. So that was the information I just wanted to bring to this committee for, as you begin discussions on what your fund balance may be going forward and what you want to make that fund balance policy, just to highlight that fund balance makes up 20% of the Moody's ratings and where we compare across the country for counties that Moody's does rate.
Thank you, Drew. So I think what I want us as a committee to consider going forward, especially as we have agreed we're going to talk about our fund balance policy, is that there are things that go into our Moody's rating, which is precarious at the current AA1 rating. Is that not the case, Drew?
Yes. As our scorecard came out, we should have been a AA2.
Okay.
And as these factors keep going to that AA2 rating, it's tougher to convince them just verbally and anecdotally that we should stay a AA1.
So there are things here we can't control. The ESG stuff is mostly stuff we cannot control. And the things that we can control are our debt level and our fund balance ratio. And so it becomes more important, especially given that they're so heavily weighted, that we control those pretty strictly. And I guess that's the only takeaway I want you all to have as we move forward. I don't think we're going to get into an excessive discussion about how we want to change our fund balance policy if we want to change it today. But yeah, I wanted you to have this basic information. And you have the general Moody's rating information and the ranges that they use for making these assignments in your packet. And Drew can send us the specific information of where we fall, which would be helpful. But I didn't want to overburden you all today, so I didn't make him send it before the meeting. Lee?
Appreciate that. I know that we asked Norma a couple times there for fund balance. Hearing Drew talk about the little nuances with Moody's, I'm just wondering how we align those and kind of emphasize where we're getting into trouble areas moving ahead.
And it's difficult because, as Rick always pointed out to us, and Drew has continued to tell us, our fund balance fluctuates pretty substantially. Like right now, we're heading into collecting the county taxes. So we're going to have a real hefty fund balance. And then once we get to May and June, we start doing the road projects and the building projects and all the capital things that we wait for summer to do. And we start, spending money in fairly large amounts. And so there will be fluctuations of tens of millions of dollars. Drew, I think it's the beginning of the year, is it not?
What was that question?
The Moody's rating process, when they evaluate what our fund balance is that generally the first quarter of the year when we're cash rich?
It's usually the end of the year, and then we update it in 6 months, so they do blend those two. They require twice a year updating.
Well,
So.
those don't seem to be the times of the year when we have the most money, is it?
No. Now, right now, I was just looking, and we're well over 100 million currently, which is, as you mentioned, the end of March is when our taxes and early April, and then by the end of April and May, we start spending considerably.
So what was our fund balance amount in December when they looked at it?
I'd have to go back and look at what our audited fund balance is. They don't use the audited fund balance. They have their own calculation of fund balance. It's very close to our audited fund balance, but Moody's recalculates it on their terms. So they had 103,800,000.
Was that the blended June and December?
Yes.
Okay.
That is part of how they calculate it. So.
And we were looking at 65 or 70 at November time, correct? So that really does tell you how much it's.
Yeah, it fluctuates pretty wildly, actually.
Yeah.
Mike, did you have a question?
Yeah, Drew, you mentioned that one of the factors they were looking at was our exposure to natural disasters and things like that. And you said that half our population is in the city, but the whole city isn't in a flood zone. In fact, as most of the population lives up on the hills and out of the flood zone. So does that factor in?
Yes, it does, Mike. They look at each flood zone area on the map, and then they assign the population that they can best do based on housing and demographics and things like that. So you are correct, like all of Cornell is well out of the floodplain, so all of that housing is good to have up at that level. It doesn't help us with the nor'easters, but it does help with the 100-year flood. So.
Well, we'll have another example tonight.
Well, and the other thing to bear in mind is with the new FEMA flood maps, I think that our exposure is going to be greater than it was.
Yeah.
So that doesn't help. Rich, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was going to mention that it could be that dredging would actually help our bond rating, which is an odd way to think about it. Maybe. I mean, it would reduce the exposure there. I was curious, you moved by the our capital program and our total borrowing, are we at all exposed from that direction? My understanding is we don't have an imbalance in our total indebtedness.
No, we are very well rated in that area. I mean, we could spend each meeting, we could probably spend 10 minutes to half an hour on each of these categories. So that's why I glanced over that a little bit.
Sure. I'm wondering, is there anything we could do to get to an AAA? Is that a possibility? I'd always heard AA1 was the best we could expect to do.
As a county.
As a county.
That is correct. In New York State, they have never rated anyone above the AA1. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with the economy, has to do with the tax rates, things like that.
And is there any recommendation you'd make regarding our current fund balance policy to ensure that we protect ourselves from this direction?
I definitely think we should look at it and then look at, you know, if we were to spend down to the current fund balance policy, I couldn't assure us that it would impact the Moody's rating, but I would be surprised if it didn't. So
I guess I would be looking for some recommendation from you on what is that percentage we should be replacing our current fund balance policy with if we wanted to protect the AA1 or do what we can to protect it.
Yeah, if you're looking at purely protecting that, I would definitely look at, you know, that 38 to 40% as a minimum. And I see all three arguments with fund balance that, you know, we've collected that through taxes, so you may want to refund that to the taxpayers, or there's a number of uses for it that we talked about earlier in the meeting. So do we use fund balance to address those issues? Or here's the third argument of, do we keep a strong fund balance so we can keep a good credit rating and that we have a good rainy day fund?
Well, and we are costing the taxpayers if we go to AA2 every time we borrow, right?
Yep.
And
Yes.
I think you said for every level, we're talking about $100,000 a year, roughly on a.
It was 25 basis points per 100.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it really depends on how much we borrow each year on that. But since I've been here, we've gone typically around $10 million at least. I think a couple years ago, we were over 20 million in the bond issuance. So.
And if we say we did a $10 million issue and we were at AA2, I think that's what you were saying, the difference.
Yeah, that's going to be, I think, right around, I'd have to go back and look, but I think you're right. It was around 100,000 a year. So I mean, from the standpoint of it's the taxpayers' money, yeah, but if we're holding it and it's making us or allowing us to borrow at a more favorable rate, we are doing something good for the taxpayer. right.
Yeah.
It's complicated.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
But-
I mean, it's not as easy. And it's not just a question of what number we put in our policy. It has a lot to do with the appetite of some of our colleagues to spend down to that number. I mean, in a dire emergency, it would be good to have a low number. But yeah.
I mean, in our own bubble, we could debate and come to what we think is the appropriate amount of fund balance, and we might be right, but Moody's has entirely their own view of the world, and they could be right or wrong, but they're Moody's. So I would favor us just setting up a policy that says we're going to satisfy Moody's, and once we satisfy Moody's, then I think we can have wonderful arguments about spend.
Well, I'm going to sit back and eat popcorn and watch you argue that to some of our colleagues, but I can't say I disagree with you.
I certainly don't want to try to answer questions from the public if our bond rating was downgraded.
No, me neither.
That would be a really irresponsible moment.
Okay, I've got questions from Lee and then Mike.
Just a little of the heartburn here is it really goes back to the debt service part. And I know you do a good job projecting out where we may be with bond payments and projects in the years ahead. But when we keep kind of throwing numbers around about what a center of government might be and what a new public safety building might be and so on, I'm just wondering if there's some analysis there that's been done that says what we really can afford without touching the fund balance or project out, because we're probably going to in earnest start to try to come up with some plans here. And when we start throwing these numbers in the tens of millions of dollars, I'm not sure it wouldn't affect our bond rating to try to tackle all of that. So I'm just wondering if we've really done an analysis of what can we afford to do before we get to this decision point of what is it we're going to do.
Yeah, and I think some of us are starstruck when they see all those zeros after a number. So, Mike?
Just that I continue to think that our fund balance ought to be in a range, not just a set number.
That's fair. I think, too, we apparently need to do something about our public safety building. We have a center of government on the capital plan. We have labor negotiations. We have the EF MAP problem. And we have another problem in the larger economy that I'm hoping we'll get to talk about a bit later. I think we can't do it all, and we're going to have to accept the fact that we can't do it all, and we're going to have to prioritize, and that's going to be a difficult process, and it's not just going to be the 5 people here today or 6 people that are here today, but we just need to keep that in mind. We can't do it all. Rich?
Sorry to speak again, but I had a follow-up to what Lee was saying. Drew, is there a calculation Moody's does, say if we do a large capital borrowing in that we're gaining an asset to counterbalance that? Say if we did a center of government building, we would then own a very valuable building at the same time we're incurring the debt. Is it just the debt that influences the Moody's rating, or is it also the acquisition of the asset?
Is there a balance sheet?
There is a balance sheet. There is an overall fiscal standing of the county, and how we operate as a county. I think that's part of that institutional framework. But they really focus on that debt, because really what Moody's is, as they explained it to me this year, they're really representing the folks that are going to loan us money. They're giving assurance to those folks that may loan Tompkins County money and buy our bonds that, hey, this is your risk, and how likely is it that Tompkins County can easily pay those back.
And you can't really securitize a borrowing with a jail building because nobody wants a jail building.
We could sell our jail.
Good luck with that.
I mean, the center of government building, in theory, you could sell, but yeah, the jail would be problematic.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Last one thing to say is in 2024, in our plan, in 2023. We have already planned to spend $7 million of fund balance.
Right. Yeah.
So there is a
Keep
plan.
reminding us.
I'm just, yeah, so that's already there. 7, nearly 7, not quite, but that's already built into the long term. Not that you can't make decisions to change that, but that's the plan.
Okay. I want to thank you for this information, Drew, and if you'll just forward that county-specific information so that we can chew on it for a while, that would be great. And before we let you go, I'm going to move to consideration of the resolution opposing enactment of Executive Budget Article 7 legislation, Part M, and urging Governor Hochul and the state legislature to develop a more targeted and refined approach to modifying the in-rem tax foreclosure process ID 11535. Can somebody move that, please? Rich moves it, Amanda seconds. Thank you. I wanted to do this now while you're here with us, Drew. You can probably do a better job than I can of explaining why this is such a problem for us. And I would also direct everyone's attention to the executive summary from NISAC that I sent you all earlier today. So Drew, do you want to start our discussion?
I think that executive summary does the best. A lot of this is unknown until it actually goes into play, but some of the things that most counties are sharing concerns about, and I would share them as well, is when we foreclose on a property, especially if it's a residential property, it's a 3-year process. I mean, we start the final part of that process in October, and this year we started with over 100 properties that went into the foreclosure process to be auctioned in June of 2023. And we're already down under 50 properties because we really try to work with those folks. Some of the concerns are that looking back at the last 4 or 5 years, we only have a handful of properties that we make money on. More than not, we lose money on them. We're already making the towns whole, school districts whole, villages, municipalities. We're paying off those taxes. So that's got to be part of the law, has been our opinion, is that, how do we either share the burdens or, share the wealth? And more importantly, the governor's proposal really doesn't address how you take care of mortgages. Again, a lot remains to be seen, but right now there's a lot of requirements on banks, and when they foreclose on a property for failure to pay on a mortgage, there's a process they have to go through. If that mortgage in the value of the property are in a borderline area, it may fall to the county, and they may just say, let the county do the work, which, a lot of the process that banks have to go through are to protect the property owners, and this would allow them to go around that. Again, it remains to be seen if we'll see a lot of that, but there is, as Bill Troy has shared, there is a case out in the Midwest that's going before the Supreme Court, and we're anticipating that's going to change how we do this in New York State, and that we'll have to change it. But what we're arguing is that has to be a very mindful and thought out change. This seems to be fairly quick and a lot more questions than actual process.
Yeah, the Supreme Court case, Tyler v. Hennepin County, it's going to be argued in next month. I don't think there's a lot of doubt that they're going to decide that the counties shouldn't be able to keep the surplus, and I guess that's fair from the perspective of the homeowner. And unfortunately, the governor's quick fix in her budget is just to say, okay, counties, you don't get to keep the surplus. Well, that's fine as far as it goes, but there's a lot of process problems with that, some of which have been outlined in here. I mean, one of the big ones that I can see is that there's been a Second Circuit case that was decided just last year that holds that for the purposes of bankruptcy, a tax foreclosure, an in-rem tax foreclosure in which the homeowner doesn't get the surplus is a fraudulent conveyance, because the homeowner has given up this home and their equity in the home for less than reasonably equivalent value, which is the language in the bankruptcy code. So the question becomes, say we foreclose on a property and the homeowner goes into bankruptcy within the statutory period, the bankruptcy court could say, well, that's a fraudulent conveyance, and then what do we do? Do we have to buy the property back? Do we have to give the taxpayer the surplus? I mean, it is a dumpster fire in terms of working it out, and that's just one of the problems. So, yeah, all this resolution does, I think, is point out to the governor that this needs to be slowed down, and we need to come up with a better process. Mike?
Yes, it's going to be really complicated, and who knows how it's going to end up. But I think it points to the fact that we have done so much over the years to reduce the number of foreclosed properties that we have because we don't want to take those properties. And, you know, our directors of finance have always stood on their heads to try to figure out ways that to work out for those taxes to be paid. Up to a certain point, of course. But that means that we don't sell many properties in Tompkins County. You get to some of the counties out there. I remember some director of finance telling me about, maybe it was Sullivan County, and they had hundreds of properties that they had tax foreclosure proceedings going against. And I just want to say that no matter how this ends up, our processes here are going to make it so it doesn't hurt us as much as it does some other counties.
Well, yeah, that's true. And I've always been impressed and proud of our finance department for the care it takes to minimize the number of tax foreclosures that we have to move forward with. But the fact of the matter is, even the few that we do, we lose money on many of them. And by allowing us to keep surplus, it evens out. I fear that if this goes through as written by the governor, counties are going to start picking and choosing which properties they foreclose on, because who the heck wants to put all that work into something and then lose money on it? And that's really inherently unfair to homeowners. So for all of those reasons, I'm hoping that we can just move this resolution through, and hopefully it'll do some good. I do want to note, and this is my mistake, Brett, that on line 8, it says Governor Hochul's executive budget revenue. The revenue word doesn't belong there. Just take it out. I think that's like plain error. And if there's no more discussion, we can vote on this. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. And thank you, Drew, for bringing this issue to our attention, and then having NISAC reinforce it when we went up there for the conference was really helpful. So thank you.
The last item I have is just to let the committee know, each time we talked about that, I'd update you with New York class. We are coming into where we're cash rich, so we decided on Friday to move 5 million more, so we have 45 million at New York class, and the rate as of this morning was 4.47. So
That's nice.
it is, especially when we were borrowing our bonds at 3.5–3%. So
Yeah.
That's not deposited with the Silicon Valley Bank, is it?
no.
We're going to talk about that later. Okay. So thank you, Drew. And now we were told, Veronica, that the resolution regarding the new amended bylaws was going to be removed because you all haven't had a chance to vote on it. But do you have anything to report from WDIC?
Yeah, that's correct. The new WDIC chair is not very good at time management within a meeting, it turns out. But we spent last meeting going through our goals, which I emailed out to the legislators this morning. A lot of things pulled from last year to either do that get done or continue for ongoing things. I'm not going to go through them all. They vary a lot in scope, but happy to answer any questions or field questions for next time.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about WDIC goals? I guess not today. So you're more than welcome to stay for more riveting BCP discussions, but if you want to skip out, I'll
Thanks for sending
understand.
those out to us.
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
I'll stay.
Okay, great. So the next thing we have is Human Resources Commissioner Ruby. Are you there?
I believe Ruby is en route traveling with her husband, so I'm not sure if she was going to, she had to leave early today.
Okay. Well, let's see. You probably are as aware as anyone else about where we are with our various personnel searches.
Yes, I can speak to those.
Thank you.
Let's see. So we are in the midst of searching for the Chief Equity Diversity Officer, the Homeless Services Coordinator, Finance Director, County Historian, and scheduling search times for ITS Director. So those, and HR those are the kind of executive level searches that are currently underway with HR, with more anticipated in April and May.
More?
Well, we've been waiting to finalize when we get the charter change for Office of Employment and Training, Workforce Development Director, Recycling Materials Management. We're working on job description there, and there's another department as well.
Okay, any questions on our many searches? Thank you, Lisa. Okay, well, we have some time,
I
so.
might pipe back in.
Okay, we have one more resolution. Authorization to increase hours, various environmental health positions, Department of Whole Health, ID 11537. Rich moves, Amanda seconds. We've got Liz Cameron here. I assume you're here for Frank to tell us about this, Liz, so I'm going to defer to you.
Actually, I think Brenda Grinnell Crosby is covering for Frank, and I'm here to answer questions, so I'll defer to Brenda, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine. We're an awfully deferential group, aren't we?
Actually, Liz, you should go ahead and take this, but these are, just very briefly, this is in her unit. She has lost 2 of her support staff since the end of the year. I think they left end of December, very 1st of January. And they've had some significant work changes from different things from the state. I'm going to let Liz speak to all of those, but it is impacting staff positions. Go ahead, Liz.
So, so from our support staff, the complexity of the work is at a higher level, and the time it takes to do it is more than the 35 hours that they're scheduled. So we're wanting to increase their hours. They have to enter things into these complex state databases that won't sync with our county databases yet. So there's duplication of entry. We've had increases in programs, which creates more administrative work, increases in the number of permits we issue. So those are some of the changes that we've been dealing with that affect our support staff. Did you want me to talk about the senior one as well, Brenda? Okay, I guess you did put it back on me. Sorry, I wasn't aware that's how this was going to go. So we also have found that we are have a senior environmental health specialist position. Our other seniors are at 37.5 hours a week, and we they do take that amount of time for the work involved. I'm at 40 hours a week. Most of our staff is at 35, but each of the seniors manages, I think, at least 5 environmental health programs. So they have to be technical and regulatory specialists as well as supervising staff. So we're requesting that their hours get increased to 37 and a half hours as well. So I think that covered. Oh, and then we have our existing administrative coordinator. Hers is essentially the same as the support staff that would be underneath her in terms of the workload.
Thank you, Liz. And my understanding from the resolution is that you all have excesses in your budget right now, at least, that would cover these increases?
I'm going to let Brenda.
That's correct. We have vacancies in the department. We've been trying to recruit and hire. Hasn't been particularly easy at any level of position right now, including our administrative positions. We've had a number of vacancies throughout whole health.
Well, I sympathize. We're seeing that everywhere. I would remind everyone, though, that even though the money's there for this year, in the out years, this is going to increase target.
And we did get the increase in fringe, our state aid on fringe. So my preliminary estimate would be we're going to be okay next year. But until you start putting things together, it's really difficult to know. But we should be okay.
Well, you got to do what you got to do. I just wanted to be sure everybody understood what the implications of what we're voting on. So, Lee?
That was my question. Anybody that might be watching this, they're having a slow day if they are, but it's 4 FTEs. It remains 4 FTEs. It's a total of 10 hours a week that we're authorizing. And that was my question. How does that affect the target? And even though we're not changing FTEs, we're changing, how much the payroll is for those 4 positions. But Brenda seems to have alleviated my concern there by saying that she's balancing it through the vacancies and other means.
For now.
But would that affect the target under our budget by?
Only if they don't have enough money to pay for it next year, but Brenda's saying that they
Not an automatic target.
We're not, no, this is not a target change at all.
How is that possible? If you're increasing somebody's hours and increasing their salary, how does that not change target?
It doesn't change the actual amount that they have for target. So they have to, their fiscal target will remain the same, and they will have to work out their budget within the target parameters that are given to them for that year. So they're not asking for additional funding, so we're not changing their target.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Learn something new every day. All right. Are we ready to vote on this one? All in favor? Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay. Now, unless you've been hiding under a rock this weekend, you probably noticed that we've had 3 bank failures. One was Silvergate, which voluntarily chose to liquidate. SVB was taken into receivership on Friday, and Signature Bank was put in receivership yesterday, which is kind of unusual. I don't know what kind of impact we should be expecting in the larger economy. I don't know how widespread the impact of this is going to be in the financial sector. On the one hand, the regulators are trying to tell us that these are idiosyncratic events, niche banks, not like 2008 at all, because they're smaller regional banks, although they try to say they're smaller regional banks, and SVB turns out to be the second largest bank that was ever shut down in U.S. history. The way I see it, these banks really didn't do anything wrong, which is kind of weird. They got put in a really bad position because of the confluence of a number of events, the pandemic, the increase in cash deposits, particularly large uninsured deposits by corporate and institutional depositors, the limited options they had to invest in assets, and they ended up holding a whole lot of long-term debt paper that paid really low interest rates. And then the Fed turned around and jacked the interest rates by 4.5% over a period of 6 to 8 months. Those problems, I think, are generalizable to the entire financial sector. I mean, they're all suffering with the whiplash from what the Fed's done, leaving the interest rates low for too long and then turning around and jacking them in short order. And then another issue with asset quality is going to be in the larger sector, people who didn't buy long-term debt paper but instead made loans. To the extent those loans are secured by real estate, the real estate is decreasing in value at a fairly substantial rate. So the value of those loans is going to go down as well. On the one hand, the regulators are telling us we don't need to worry about this, but on the other hand, they're ignoring the deposit insurance limits to make sure that all of the depositors in SVB are covered. I have heard on the news that they're promising to cover deposits in all banks. I haven't been able to find anything solid to support that. I looked on the Federal Reserve and FDIC website, and all they talk about is insuring the depositors for SVB. So it remains to be seen what they do. But even more concerning is this $25 billion bank term funding program, or whatever they call it, that they have put into place to make loans to any bank that's in distress, secured by the assets of the bank at face value, or at book value, not at fair market value. So that's interesting. If they weren't worried, they wouldn't do that. And I'm geeking out on this because I used to close banks for a living. But I think we need to pay attention to this because it's just another financial stressor potentially that we don't need. I don't know if anybody wants to say anything about this or just wants to go home and cry. Mike.
I haven't heard you say anything about crypto. I think a lot of the problem here had to do with the crypto decline.
It may have. But that's Silvergate. Silvergate was the crypto bank. And
Well, so was SVI.
SVB was more...
SVB, rather.
SVB was more venture capital startups and tech. And obviously, tech suffered as Bitcoin has, as crypto has suffered, but I don't think the problem is necessarily crypto. And if it is, then this is going to be an idiosyncratic situation. But the regulators aren't treating it as an idiosyncratic situation, no matter what they say. Another issue that's problematic is this is the first series of bank failures where the bank runs have been accelerated significantly by the fact that you can do things online and you can spread contagion through social media. So a bank run can materialize much more quickly and seem to come out of nowhere. I don't know, guys. I'm really concerned about this, and I think we should be keeping our eyes on it.
I don't know what we do about it, but yes, I think.
Oh, we can't do diddly squat about it, Rich, but yeah. It's just like we can't do anything about geographical location and flood maps and weather events, but we just need to be aware it's going to impact us potentially to no small degree.
I would think that we will know within a month if this goes much bigger. If there aren't bank failures in a month, I think we're in a much better place because the federal government is probably working really hard to shore up every bank in the country right now.
Yeah. I don't know where the money for that's going to come from. And I would remind people, you know, everybody talks about 2008 being this, you know, turning point in this great catastrophe. And I looked at some numbers. In 2008, only 25 banks in the United States failed. And it started pretty early in the year with IndyMac. In 2009, 140 banks failed. In 2010, 157 banks failed. In 2011, 92 banks failed. In 2012, 51 banks failed. And that was finally the end of it. But that was a long 5-year slide. So I don't know. I would say we need to give this probably 3 or 4 months before we see just how bad it's going to be. Interestingly enough, the stocks of some of these banks have really crashed this morning. First Republic Bank, which was the bank that Peter Thiel told all his companies and followers to move their deposits to, their stock's down 60% as of this morning. Now, I can understand why the stock of these banks is going to fall because the bailout this time is not to the bondholders and shareholders. It's to the depositors, which is as it should be, in my opinion. But nevertheless, large investors that have, you know, or large depositors who have deposits that are uninsured, are going to be paying close attention to the health of their banks. And one way that we measure health is stock price. So I don't know. I don't know what impact those stock falls are going to have on people. It's worth noting that the numbers I've heard for the uninsured deposits at SVB are somewhere between $150 and $155 billion. So, have a nice night.
Thanks for sharing your insight with us.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm sorry, I just kind of wonk out about this. But, I just don't want to live through another one of these.
I was reading that one option for the debt ceiling discussion is that the Treasury could mint a $1 trillion coin that would lower the amount of debt. And that there are bills in Congress now trying to prevent that from happening. Not that I think there's much chance it will happen, but there are interesting things out there.
There's a lot of paranoia out there about, you know, this idea that the Fed just sits there and prints money and, you know, and our currency's being devalued because they're out there printing money. And at the same time, the very same people are arguing that the problem we're having now is that the money supply is contracting. So the paranoiacs out there really need to make up their mind. Anyhow.
Good luck.
Yeah, good luck with that. Does anybody have anything else they want to talk about? Well, then I guess we're adjourned, and thank you all. You're welcome.